you're an amateur musician wondering how best to turn pro, what planning should you do? Also, if you're looking to tour abroad, what are the legal implications, especially in a post-Brexit Europe? We'll explore these points and more in today's episode. Welcome to Half Hour Mentor. My name is Ian Cleverden, and welcome to my audio podcast series designed to help anyone who's looking for inspiration to develop their creative skills, whether professionally or as a hobbyist. For this series, our focus is the creative arts. I'm interviewing musicians, songwriters, authors and actors, but also speaking to some in the directing and strategic management fields of this wide-ranging industry. All of my guests have been carefully chosen, as each one of them has an interesting backstory from which we can all learn. If you're new to the series, please follow it on whichever streaming platform you use and go back and have a listen to the rich archive of over 30 interviews and compilations. My guest today is singer-songwriter Sarah McQuaid. Sarah was born in Spain, raised in Chicago, and has dual citizenship of both Ireland and the USA. She's settled in rural England, but regularly tours the UK, Europe and the USA. She has 6 albums to her name, and her songwriting style covers many genres. What interested me in interviewing Sarah is that not only is she a wonderfully versatile live musician and fabulous songwriter, but she turned professional at a mature age, to quote her, and also has great experience of touring abroad, something that has become increasingly difficult and bureaucratic in the post-Brexit environment. If you're not familiar with Sarah's work, I've curated a short Spotify playlist of her songs. This episode is also being released on the 4th of November 2023, right at the start of Sarah's UK tour. So do check out where she's playing at her website, sarahmcquaid.com. The links to both can be found in the show notes. This series is completely independent and ad-free, so if you like what you hear and you'd like to help cover some of the production costs, please feel free to donate what you can via the link on the Corona Sound website, the link to which can be found in the show notes. I caught up with Sarah via Zoom as she just arrived back in England following a US tour and just before she starts her UK tour. Sarah McQuaid, welcome to Half Hour Mentor.
Thank you so much, Ian. It's lovely to talk to you.
Yes, you too. I'm going to start asking you a question that I ask all of my guests to start off with, and that is, just going back to your teenage or your childhood years, what was the first job or career that sprung to mind that you wanted to do?
Oh, I can remember when I was really little, announcing to my mother, to her great, horror, that I wanted to breed horses. And she said, that would be terrible. You'd be wasting all your abilities. But I loved horses. But yeah, no, I kind of grew out of that one fairly quickly and kind of fell backwards into becoming a journalist. And then eventually, finally became a full-time musician, when I kind of ran out of other things to do.
What age were you at the horses idea?
Probably about 7 or something. It's just the first thing I can remember telling my mother I wanted to do when I grew up.
But then say about journalism, how did that come about?
Again, by accident. I fell backwards into it. I'd had various summer jobs doing journalism, not because it was anything I particularly wanted to do or kind of had always dreamed of, but because I was capable of doing it. I'm very good at writing quickly, and well. And so then when I moved to Ireland, I fell backwards again into journalism. I'd written my guitar book, which is something I did want to do, and it got reviewed really well in the Irish Times. And I wrote a letter thanking the reviewer for her nice things that she'd said about my guitar book. And then sometime later, I got a call from her saying that the Evening Herald in Dublin had asked her to start writing a music column for them. And she'd said no, because she was already writing for the Irish Times, but she'd recommended me. So I started writing a music column for the Evening Herald, and then Hot Press approached me and I started writing for them. And meanwhile, this temping job that I'd had turned into a job editing the alumni magazine of UCD, University College Dublin, and that turned into a job editing a whole series of magazines. And none of this was anything I'd ever kind of set out to do or intended. My first job out of university was working in a music shop, which I did for 7 years, which was a great job because I was around guitars all the time. And then I was able to take time off and go on tour with the band I was playing with at the time. it was the kind of job where I could say to the owner of the shop, I'm going to be away for the next, 5 weeks on tour with the band. Could you get somebody to cover for me while I'm away? And he would say, yeah, absolutely, that's fine. And
wow, that's good. That's rare.
It was great. Yeah.
So when did the musical journey start then? What was the first trigger?
Really early. I mean, I started playing piano. My mother started teaching me to play piano when I was about 3 years old. And then I picked up a guitar. She taught me rudiments of guitar as soon as I was able to hold it. She had a classical guitar, which I still have. So I learned to play on that. And then when I was 14, for my birthday, asked for a steel string guitar and got a secondhand Yamaha FG375S, which my son has now. Actually, I've given it to him. So that was really nice to be able to pass that on. But I started singing quite early on with the Chicago Children's Choir, which was a really, really fantastic children's choir. Very intensive rehearsal schedule. We rehearsed twice a week, and I guess it was like an hour and a half or 2 hours at a time. And then once I became a soloist as well, I was also getting an extra rehearsal once a week, where I got voice training. And then we would go off on tour for kind of 10 days at a time. And that would be a really intensive schedule where we were all in a big tour bus, and we'd have like school workshops and maybe a local TV taping during the day, and then a concert every evening. And then we'd all be parceled off to host families and then be sent off in the morning back on the bus with a packed lunch and go off and do it all again. I've still got some of those tour itineraries, and they're intense. It makes my tour schedule now look really easygoing. So yeah, when I started writing songs, I think I wrote my first song when I was 8 years old, but none of it's been anything I really had much control over. Do you know what I mean? Right. I just kind of did things.
So you grew up in America. Was it in Chicago?
Yeah. First Chicago, and then when I was 13 or 14, I was just 13 turning 14, we moved to Washington, D.C. I think we moved just after my 14th birthday to Washington, D.C. And so I went to secondary school there, and then went to university, or college as they call it in the States, just outside Philadelphia, and did a BA in philosophy. And then stayed on after that working for Vintage Instruments for 7 years in Philadelphia, and then moved to Ireland with my first husband, and stayed in Ireland 13 years in the process, getting divorced and remarried and having our two kids that I have with my second and still husband. Right. And then moved to England 15 years ago.
That's good. Well, we'll explore the English links in a short while. But let's go back to the musician side then. So from the turning professional, what was the point that made you want to become professional and think that you can make a career out of it?
Well, I was really miserable working as a magazine editor when my kids were little. They were 2 and 4, respectively. And I was having to drop them off to nursery in the morning and collect them in the evening. And I was just completely miserable. I remember, I'd drop them off at nursery and then be crying on the way to work. I had a long commute, and it was my husband who said, well, why don't you quit your job and become a full-time musician? And he said, and I said, because to be a full-time musician, I'd have to tour, and you wouldn't be going away on tour. And he said, well, I think we'd probably all see a lot more of you if you were away on tour some of the time and here the rest of the time than if that.
But like a 9-to-5 job.
Then with the 9-to-5 job, if you stayed on doing the 9-to-5 job and, having the long commute.
Yeah, what were you doing? What was your job at that time?
I was a magazine editor.
All right, so still in journalism, yeah.
Yeah, and I was also still writing music and theatre reviews for the Evening Herald, and album reviews, occasional concert reviews, and long kind of profile pieces on musicians for Hot Press. The profile pieces were great. I mean, I got to meet Alison Krauss and Jaw Wobble and all sorts of interesting people and have long conversations with them. So that was great. I enjoyed doing the freelance work, and I kept on the freelance work for a while after I quit my job my full-time job. But in the end, I couldn't do that and have a music career in my own right. And as well have that, try and spend time with the kids. It was all just too much. So something had to go. So I cut out the freelance work and just became a full-time musician and a mum to my kids the rest of the time.
That's really interesting, because I know some of my listeners will be musicians who are perhaps part-time, they're working, and they're trying to work out how to take that leap to become full-time and give up the job. And I know in some previous guests actually have still done part-time work whilst they've been a professional musician as such. How did you sort of cut off from that previous role and then just dedicate yourself, thinking perhaps from a financial point of view, a commitment point of view? How did you deal with that?
I have to also point out that I wouldn't have done it if it weren't for Dick Gaughan telling me I could, because I don't know if your listeners know of Dick Gaughan. He was a wonderful, Scottish guitarist and songwriter, and the thing that sparked the whole thing of me going back to playing music full time was that I had a phone call from a guitar festival in Strandhill, County Sligo, asking if I would come and give a workshop on the Dad Gad tuning, because they knew about my Dad Gad book. And I said, well, I couldn't. I haven't played guitar in 5 years. I can't even remember, how to do it. And they said, oh, well, we really, really want you to do this. And you would be co-presenting the workshop with Dick Gaughan. And he's said he knows of your book and he thinks it's wonderful and he'd love to meet you and really looks forward to co-presenting the workshop with you. And I thought, well, it's one thing to turn down the opportunity to give a workshop, but it's another thing to turn down the opportunity to give a workshop alongside Dick Gaughan and, have the honor of working with him. I'll be kicking myself for the rest of my life if I do that. So I said yes to that and quickly got my guitar out of the case for the first time in years and started trying to relearn how to play it. I actually had to refer to my own guitar book to relearn all the chords. I didn't remember how to do anything, but fortunately I had the guitar book to tell me. So I went off to Strandhill and co-presented this workshop with Dick Gaughan. And he said to me, why aren't you out there playing music? Why aren't you touring? I don't see your name out there anywhere, And I said, oh, I don't think there'd be any market for what I do, certainly not as a solo artist. And I'd given up the band years ago. And he said, well, there would totally be a market for what you do. You're a great singer and a great guitarist and people would want to hear you. So, I went back thinking, maybe I could do this. And I guess I would have told Fergal, my husband, about it. And he would, that would have come into his thinking when he said, why didn't you give up the job and just become a musician? So that was in September, that festival. And so I thought to myself, right, I'll start trying to book myself a tour for the month of March and see if I can get, say, a couple of weeks of gigs booked in March. And then, if it's looking by December as though I can book myself a tour, and we'll have enough gigs to make some money, then I'll hand in my notice. So that's what I did, and that's what happened. I also got a great opportunity because I was chatting with the people at Quail Records and told them that I was thinking of leaving my job and becoming a musician. And they said, oh, well, listen, that first album, because I had recorded my first album. I'd done that when my first husband and I split up and we sold the house that we owned together. I took the money that was my cut of the house and spent the money on recording my first album. And that was just something that I recorded thinking, right, this is just something I want to do and want to have done. And I had no thought really of touring it. But so that had come out back in 1997. So here it was 2006, and I was thinking of quitting my job, and I told Gail Lynn about this, and they said, well, why don't you let us re-release that first album of yours? And because we're trying to get our in-house marketing department going, and it'll be kind of a good guinea pig for us without us having invested any money in recording the album. The album's already there. We'll relaunch it for you and see if we can do a good job with it. And they got me on national television in Ireland. So that was amazing. So, before I'd even done a gig as a solo artist, I made a solo appearance on this late night TV show called The View with John Kelly in Ireland. And, they always had like a musical guest at the end of the show. It was mostly kind of an arts chat show, but they'd always have a musical guest last on at the end of the show doing one song in studio. And I got to do that. And the video of that performance is still on my website, actually, on my YouTube channel. And so then I had that video to point to, when I was trying to get gigs, which was an amazing thing to be able to point to, a really good quality, professionally filmed video of me performing live on national TV. So
absolutely, great opportunity.
Yeah. So I've been incredibly fortunate, in the opportunities that I've had, and I feel a bit guilty. But
well, can I just say on that you're very much in the majority of my guests who say, "Oh, I've been really lucky. I've been fortunate in the way that something came along like that." But to be fair, when you reflect back on it, you make your own luck. You do drive that, and it gives you've convinced somebody to take that chance. And that is very, very common. So, fair play to you from on the praise side. That's something that you did, and that enthusiasm, the spark and the quality and the talent has made that happen.
Oh, thank you.
No, genuine. And, having listened to quite a lot of your music as well, it very much comes across. So excellent. So that kicked that off. That's really interesting to see how you turn that into a professional side. So you sort of gave yourself 6 months really to think, okay, can I get myself ready for this tour in March? How did you feel when that first tour was coming up?
Absolutely terrified, quaking in my boots. Yeah, no, it was terrifying. It was really terrifying. And I think the first gig of the tour actually was playing support to, before I'd even done a full solo gig, I played support to Pierre Ben-Suzanne. But he was really encouraging too, and so that was another thing that helped me.
And he's another advocate of Dadgad. And I should explain, obviously me being a guitarist as well, for the non-guitarists listening, that a guitar has recognised standard tuning, EAD, GBE. Dadgad is a variation of that is used a lot in Irish music. It's used a lot in folk, but probably leave it at that in terms as an explanation for the time being. But play around with it. Get Sarah's book. It's on Amazon.
I'm kind of funny. The book, I still sell the book at my gigs, and it's still selling. It's still, published by Hal Leonard, which is amazing. It's still in print. It came out in 1994, that book, and it's still in print, which is quite an achievement for any book. And it's still selling worldwide.
With a CD included as well.
Yeah. The CD that's included is just kind of a teaching CD. It's just the tunes that are written out in the book played very slowly, by me.
Yeah. Very helpful though. I have to say it's really, really helpful to understand the chord structures and the flow. Let's talk about your songwriting then, because obviously you went from playing traditional tunes to writing your own, and it's gradually grown and grown, and that it's, you play virtually all of your own material. How do you approach songwriting, and what inspired you to write your own songs and come up with the material in the first place?
I started writing songs, as I say, when I was really little, and I don't know what, I suppose I was singing lots of songs, so I thought I ought to write some. And I wrote some truly dreadful songs, as a child and as a teenager. And I would get up and perform my songs in chapel in school. We had chapel every Tuesday morning, and there would usually be some sort of a thing. Somebody would get up and read a poem or whatever, and I got up and would do one of my songs at chapel service, kind of thing. And then when I started playing with bands, we would generally do kind of one or two of my songs in the band's set. But I didn't think of myself as a songwriter really as such. I thought of myself as a singer and a guitarist who happened to write an occasional song. Songwriting wasn't ever, it was kind of, I heard a poet do an interview once where she said that she felt that a poem came along to her as kind of like an ongoing train, and she just would have to kind of stop what she was doing and deal with the impact of the poem and write it out. And that's kind of how I felt about songs back in those days. You'd feel a song coming on and you would just have to sit down and write it. But I never really worked much on songwriting as such until I met Zoe when I moved to Ireland. Who your listeners might remember, she had a great big hit single called Sunshine on a Rainy Day.
Yes, indeed. Great song.
She's written lots of great songs since then. She's an absolutely brilliant songwriter. She just seems to, kind of breathe out songs. And I've never met like it. But she and I met because our kids were going to the same tiny little school. And she came over to my house one day and said, "Oh, I'm working. Can I play you a song I'm working on?" And she played me this song, and I said, "Ooh, that's a really lovely melody, but I don't understand the words that you're singing. Could you write them out for me?" And she said, "Oh, I'm just singing gibberish. I don't have any words for it." And I said, "Well, would you like some words?" And she said, "Could you? Yeah, please write some words." And she liked the words that I'd written. And she said, "Oh, do you want to write some more songs together?" And I said, "Sure." And we started writing songs together. And she said, "Do you want to make an album?" And I said, "Yeah, but how, where?" And she said, "Oh, I know this absolutely brilliant sound engineer. His name is Martin Stansbury, and I've worked on him on a bunch of different projects." So that's how I met Martin, who's been my manager and touring sound engineer ever since, and produced my current album, The St. Buryan Sessions. Mm-hmm. And so way back in 2008, he produced and recorded the Mama album that I made with Zoe. And I guess it was working with Zoe that made me finally start to believe in myself a little bit as a songwriter and think that maybe songwriting was something I should actually focus on and work on. So my first album, that one I recorded back in 1997, had one original song on it that I'd written, and the rest was all traditional. And then the second album had two of my original songs, both songs that I'd written about my mother, because my mother had just died when I made that album, and it's kind of dedicated to her. So it's all songs that I'd learned from her, or that were songs she was fond of, and then these two songs that I'd written about her. And that album came out in 2008. And meanwhile, I was working on the Mama album with Zoe, and then started actually writing songs for my third album, which came out in 2012. And that was about half and half original songs that I'd written, and a lot of Elizabethan material, which I'd started taking an interest in. So I had a medieval song. So I had a medieval song, an old Occitan, and I had a John Dowland song and a Thomas Ravenscroft. When I made my fourth and fifth albums, those focused mostly on my own original material, as did the sixth album, the St. Buryan Sessions. So the next thing I want to do is try and find the funds to renovate my garage into a studio so I can have a place to record material and start recording the new songs that I'm working on.
The songs that you write then, how do you approach them? Is it you just sit down, when inspiration strikes, you'll write? Do you put some time aside to write? How do you approach it?
The way it's gone with the past three albums is that I had loads and loads of song ideas, half-finished songs in the form of lyrics written down in my phone notepad app, and also voice memos that I would record when I get ideas for a guitar riff or a melody. I would sit down and just make a quick recording on the voice memo. I've got loads of those as well. I've been accumulating ever since we finished the Dig Any Deeper album back in 2017. So it's like I've got 6 years worth of fragmentary lyrics and voice memos. And with the Walking Into White album, I had a similar accumulation of ideas and nothing finished. That album was recorded over in the USA, so I not only booked studio time, but booked flights. So I really had to have finished songs.
Talk about having a deadline and something to work to. Wow. And
so then with that deadline hanging over with me, I sat down with all my song ideas and set about fleshing them out into finished songs for, in time to record them for the album. And that process worked incredibly well. It worked so well that for the first couple of years after that album came out, or not the first couple of years, the first year, I guess, after the album came out, what I was doing was performing the album live for the first half of every gig I did, because I felt that the songs worked so well as kind of a suite of songs, because they were all written really quickly in 1 3-week period. I had 3 weeks to flesh out all my stuff into finished songs. And so all the songs were written in the same really tight time frame, all with reference to each other. And each song that I finished, I was thinking of how it would sit alongside all of the other songs that I'd finished up to that point. And I felt like that was a really good way of working. And so when I started getting song ideas for the Dig Any Deeper album, I almost made a conscious effort not to finish songs and not to sit down and flesh them out, and to leave them in fragmentary form. And as well, I felt like it was beneficial to have them kind of all percolating around in my subconscious, and being able to come back and dip into them from time to time. Like just towards the end of this current tour when I was in the USA, one of the songs that I'd started writing 2 or 3 years ago came back to me, and I thought, you know what, actually, I've got the wrong emphasis on that song. I need to approach it this other way instead. And I kept some of what I'd already written for it and added some other words and thought a bit about the melodic structure and how I might change it and made notes about that. So it's all accumulating. But yeah, so then the Dig Any Deeper album, I recorded that with Michael Chapman producing and playing on it. And I went up to Michael Chapman's house actually to sit down and work with him and run through some of the songs that I was in the process of fleshing out. And that was really helpful too. I mean, he gave me a lot of really useful guidance, just things as simple as saying, I think you need to repeat that line, or whatever. So that was really helpful too. And as soon as I know when I'm going to have a place and a time to record the next album, I've got a load of songs that I think I can already see how they're going to work together and what the kind of themes are going to start to be. There are kind of running themes kind of forming as I'm in the process of writing. But as I say, I'm reluctant to get too deep into the writing process until I know that I have a place and a time to do the recording.
Like a lot of people, you've got the smartphone has been such a great invention to be able to capture ideas, but it's also sometimes your worst enemy in that you've got so many ideas and to go back to. But it's a great way of capturing those thoughts. Absolutely. Can I talk about touring then? Because something that stands out for me is, you've just come back from the USA doing a tour there. You're about to embark on UK. And certainly in terms of touring abroad, how do you tackle that with all the variety of different legalities that you've got to deal with?
Well, I'm very lucky. I can't keep saying I'm lucky. I'm lucky in that I have dual Irish and American citizenship. I have an Irish passport, which conveniently still allows me to I could still live anywhere in Europe, but I'm also still allowed under the Common Travel Agreement to continue living in the UK without having to get a leave to remain or anything like that. And my American passport still allows me to work in the USA. So I'm lucky in that I've got the whole of Europe and the UK and the USA that I can work in without having to worry about a work visa.
That's quite handy.
Now, there are still issues to do with customs and bringing material back and forth. I have to really limit the amount of merch that I bring over when I'm touring in Ireland and Europe to the amount that you can, there's a limit that you can bring without having to go through a whole big import process. And then in the USA, I get around that by manufacturing CDs over there. So that makes life easier. With Europe, of course, now and Ireland, because of Brexit, I now have to have a carnet, which has made touring way more expensive and difficult than it used to be, because I've got to pay for a carnet to list everything that I'm bringing over tech-wise.
That's down to the last degree about cables and plugs and things and strings that you had.
Yeah, everything, all the strings, etc. It's a real pain. And then, if stuff happens, like I had a carnet to last a year that was to get me through 3 tours. And midway through one of the tours, we had to replace an amp. And you have to list the serial numbers on these things. So suddenly I was traveling with an amp with a different serial number than the one that was on the carnet. And all I could do was just hope that nobody was going to take a close enough look to actually investigate and make sure the serial numbers matched. I mean, it was an identical piece of equipment. It was just a replacement like for like, but it's that kind of thing that the whole carnet thing just really messes up. Prior to Brexit, I didn't have to do any of that. We could just load all the gear in the van and drive to Europe and do a tour, and it was just like touring in the UK. Now it isn't anymore. There's all these extra hoops to be jumped through. And as far as I can make out, all it's doing is just creating a load of extra work and expense, not just for me, but for I have to, each tour involves visits to 4 different customs offices, because you've got to go to the customs office on the UK side before you leave and get the carnet stamped, then the customs office on the Europe side when you arrive and get the carnet stamped, and then coming back, repeat that in reverse, get it stamped and signed again, get it stamped and signed again, send it back to the Chamber of Commerce, the London Chamber of Commerce, which issued the carnet. Then I had a bit of a scare recently where, London Chamber of Commerce forwarded me a letter from the Ireland Customs Office saying that they were missing one of the stamps from the carnet, and I was going to have to pay a £6,000 fine, or euro or whatever.
Gosh.
And fortunately, I had kept a copy of the carnet. I'd scanned it all in before I had sent it back to the London Chamber of Commerce. So I had to forward the scans of the relevant pages that had been stamped to the Ireland Customs Office, and they accepted that. But, it's just, it's
extra hassle that is just
massive,
is not
huge. Yeah, huge bureaucracy that you have to go through, and cost. I mean, I can't remember what the carnet cost, £400 or £500 or something. So that's, basically you lose a gig to the cost of the carnet.
Yeah. And it's hard for the promoters as well, because they've got that extra, you're going to have to try and build that cost in to your fee. And then, of course, that makes it harder for the promoter, probably having to put ticket prices up as well at the other end.
No, ticket prices have had to go up, and then audiences are way down, partly because people are still worried about COVID, understandably, and partly because they're worried about the cost of living, understandably. I can't blame audiences that if they're going to cut back on anything, that it's going to concerts, rather than cutting back on food or heating,
That's right. But there's so much benefit to mental health as well, in terms of getting out, taking in live music, that experience. It's such a hard thing to balance. I think what we have to say is, anybody from Parliament that's listening to this, or House of Lords, please take this forward, because it's so important for musicians and for everyone, for audiences alike. It has a massive impact on it.
Arts funding has dropped off like crazy too, which so many venues depend on. And venues, I keep getting notices that venues are having to close down because they can't survive in the current climate. I mean, it's becoming a sad world.
It is.
I did a tour in Germany. My tour in Germany last March was really encouraging, because for whatever reason, people there have started coming back to gigs in some way, something resembling pre-COVID numbers, which they haven't done in the States. That was really fantastic to see that. It's the only, that German tour was, and I had a few Netherlands and one Denmark gig. It was the same. Netherlands not quite as good as Germany. Denmark is good. The Denmark gig was really well attended. But yeah, all those gigs were really well attended, and it actually almost felt like pre-COVID times, with packed houses and people really supporting music, and that was wonderful to see, and it really gave me hope. Just hope that the USA and UK can turn around in the same way.
Thanks ever so much for spending all that time with us, Sarah, and for all that honesty and your experience about the touring and songwriting. It's been really, really insightful. I've got one final question that I ask all my guests, and that is, knowing what you know now, perhaps going back to that teenage self when you were starting into the music world, what one piece of advice would you give that younger self of you?
Just believe in yourself a bit more. I don't regret anything that happened, because it's all led me to, the place where I am now. And who knows, maybe if I'd believed in myself more at a younger age, maybe I wasn't ready for it then. And maybe if I'd gone and become a full-time musician right when I'd made that first album back in 1997, maybe it would all have been a disaster, Certainly it's helped to have started at a slightly more kind of mature age, and to not to be trying to do the rock and roll lifestyle or anything. And I'm not very rock and roll at all. On a night off, I'm in bed at 8:00 just trying to catch up on sleep. But I do feel that it took me a long, long time to kind of gain enough self-confidence to actually do the things that people were encouraging me to do. And the piece of advice that I always give other musicians when they're saying, oh, what should I do? Should I? And I always say to them, please yourself. Don't write what you think the market wants to hear. Don't try and perform the way you think the market wants you to perform. Don't try to be anything that you're not. Just, be true to yourself, be yourself, and write the songs that you feel compelled to write and perform them the way you feel compelled to perform them. And if there's a market for it, there will be, and it'll find you. You don't have to try and mold yourself into some shape that you think is required. Just be yourself.
Sarah McQuaid, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Ian. Lovely chatting to you.
Sarah's career journey was quite something, and especially that it took not only the well-respected professional musician Dick Gaughan, but also, and perhaps more importantly, the support of her family to convince her to give the professional route a go. I was also interested to hear about her approach to songwriting. Deadlines have been a common theme and a common driver with all of the songwriters that I've interviewed during Half Hour Mentor. And giving yourself 3 weeks to write an album's worth of songs by booking not only a studio but flights to the USA is a real motivator. Having said that, her latter approach of letting half-completed songs percolate, as she called it, was one I hadn't heard of before, and I can definitely see the benefit of this, especially when a common theme's involved. Last but by no means least, her experience on touring abroad was invaluable. She's written a case study for the Musicians' Union on her experiences too, and a link to this can be found in the show notes. It's ideal for any musician considering touring abroad. My thanks to Sarah for giving up some time between tours, and also for her great advice. Don't forget you can have a listen to her music in the Spotify playlist I've curated, that's linked in the show notes. I've also included that great song by Zoe that she referred to, Sunshine on a Rainy Day. You can also find links to her work via her website, sarahmcquaid.com, and her social media links are also in the show notes, along with the Amazon link to her Dadgad tuning tutorial book for all you curious guitarists out there. I've got a copy and I can highly recommend it. She has more tours planned for 2024 in USA, Europe and UK, so be sure to check out her website to see where you can see her play live. If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow the series wherever you get your pods and do review the back catalogue if you're new to the series. You can leave feedback about the episode through social media by searching for Half Hour Mentor or via the email link in the show notes. I'd always love to hear from you and find out what you think about them, so please do get in touch. Thanks for listening, and until next time, bye for now.